Welcome to the Hyper Guy Motivational Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I have two wonderful guests. I have Susan Lawrence, who's a doctor and attorney. I don't know how she's got all this education, but it makes me feel bad because we're going to do a little deep dive on that. But she's got a lot more education than I will ever have. And then we're going to get Nick Woodall, and he's got an amazing consulting company that we're going to talk about and do kind of a deep dive on. And so thank you both for being here.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yes, I'm so excited to have both of you. Susan, can you just really briefly give me a little bit more about yourself, and then Nick, you'll do the same with you.
Sure.
Yeah. I grew up in New York, and I was kind of I came from a background of a lot of childhood trauma, but kind of subtle childhood trauma, and I really wanted to get away from that environment. So when I was 12 years old, I came up with this plan that I was going to go to college really young, so I would start my career and be independent. So that's what I did. So I ended up going to Baylor College of Medicine. I became a board certified medical oncologist. I had a private practice in Lancaster, California for a little while. And then I decided that I wanted to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping people with HIV and AIDS. Because back then in 1980, it would have been 1992, this community, Lancaster, was really conservative, and there was a lot of animosity and discrimination and outright cruelty toward people with HIV and AIDS, and other doctors didn't want to treat them. So I started the Catalyst Foundation. I ran the Catalyst Foundation till 1993. I'm sorry, till 2013. And in the meantime, AIDS became a kind of a manageable chronic health condition, which is wonderful. But I've always been this kind of radical person looking for a really challenging and kind of outrageous cause. So AIDS didn't kind of fit that bill anymore. So I became involved in doing prison rehabilitation and learned about life without parole. So when I first went into the prison, I didn't know anything about life without parole. I thought it was a, quote, reasonable alternative to lethal injection. And then when I started teaching the class in the prison, I learned that it's, anything but reasonable. And I met so many of my students who committed heinous crimes, but had, you know, um, seemingly transformed themselves into good and decent people, but they were never going to be given a chance to rejoin society. So that's how I got involved with life without parole and prison and sentencing reform.
Susan, let me ask you a question though. We're going to go back to this because it's a lot more involved than this. It's a lot more that it would take me an hour to go through your history. But really quickly, so after you were involved in a nonprofit organization, you decided to go to law school. So
Yes,
what made you do that? That you skipped a huge step here because I
I
think
did.
yeah. So it wasn't that you're not just an MD. You actually went to law school, and probably a later age in life because you're ready
Yes.
to establish practice. What made you do that, and was it hard for you to do that?
Well, it wasn't hard for me to do that, but the reason I did it, it was a kind of a culmination of all those years of working with people serving life without parole, and I really wanted to make a difference in changing the laws, and helping people who were deserving a second chance to get out of prison. But it really came from, I had developed this brother-sister relationship with one particular person and spent, close to 15 years of tireless advocacy, trying to help him get his sentence commuted, trying to help him get out of prison. And I was successful in doing that. It was, quite difficult, required a lot of resources and time. And I truly believe that this person was my brother. I treated him like a beloved brother. And as soon as he got commuted, his attitude toward me changed and he became cold and distant and gave me the excuse that he was just overwhelmed by the thought of rejoining society after 38 years of incarceration. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But it was very troubling to me. And then a couple weeks after he got out of prison, I had major surgery and was had major complications and was close to death. And he came. He was visiting someone else in the same hospital, coincidentally, and he came, dropped by the ICU to see me for about 15 minutes. Never asked about my condition. Never asked about my chances for survival, and left. And I never saw him again. And this created a crisis of faith of just unbelievable magnitude, because previously I believed, and I would say, all human beings are capable of redemption, no matter what they've done. I didn't think about, like, does that apply to people like Hitler? I mean, it didn't even occur to me to think like that. I was so in this bubble of prison reform. So, but after this happened, I felt like I can no longer say every human being is capable of redemption, or we are all worth more than the worst thing we've ever done. And so I became like an outcast in the prison reform community. No one wanted to hear this story. And I was told that I needed to be quiet, that I set back LWOP abolition by 20 years by sharing the story. Nobody wants to hear it. And it's been a source of a lot of pain for me. But, it took me a long time to recover from that complication. And I haven't actually completely recovered. I still have a lot of health problems related to it. But, I decided that I wasn't going to let the cruelty of one man stop me from helping people who were in need. So I had already passed the bar exam by the time this happened. And so I started another nonprofit called the Center for Life Without Parole Studies. And it's kind of a boutique, because I get, well, Nick and I both work together, on this. We get to choose which clients we take. And so I'm able to, and Nick helps me tremendously with this, able to assess, is somebody real? Because here, after almost 15 years, I believed one thing about this person, and come to find out that none of it was true. There was so much deceit, manipulation, and it was all intentional, to with one goal: to get out of prison. And once I had served that purpose, he discarded me when I was facing my death. So I continue to help people with LWOP. I've been, we're delighted that one of our clients who had double LWOP was commuted, went to the parole board. I represented him at the parole board. He's going home in December. We have a few more clients who it's looking really positive. So yeah. So
Well, Susan, I'm glad you kind of brought that up. I think sometimes that you're very, very honest, and I think that's why Nick was shaking his head.
Yeah.
When you work with a large group of people, doesn't matter whether it's prison or not prison. Um, I think that there's some people that are going to be more genuine, and it's hard sometimes because you want to have faith that everyone is in a place where they're going to be able to be kind to others, or appreciate the what's good that's coming to their life. But unfortunately, that's just not realistic, right?
exactly.
As much as we all want it to be that way, it's not that way.
Exactly.
And that's why I appreciate. I think that's why Nick was shaking his head, because I'm sure Nick was inside with a lot of people that he knew weren't ready to be out. And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of people I've met that they're ready to be out, and they're ready to be out. But there's a lot of folks I met that for a variety of reasons they shouldn't be out. And it's not to say they shouldn't be out one day or anything like that, or that they're bad people. It just means they're not in a place that would make themselves safe, or anyone in the community safe. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's better than being a place where they're more safe and they don't hurt anybody else.
Hmm.
But
Exactly.
Susan, what you're saying, you're very, very honest. And that's why it's very important that we have a very balanced way of looking at things. And I think you and I have had this conversation.
Yes.
Um, and Nick, tell me about yourself, Nick. I guess that's a good segue for you. And can you tell me a little bit how you grew up, and then tell me how you started getting in the criminal justice system, and what was that first step in, and I guess the first step out after?
Right, right. So I grew up in Bakersfield, California, most of my life, and I grew up in a drug-infested, alcohol-infested, criminal-infested family. It was normal. My parents had been to prison, in and out of jail. I grew up with drugs and alcohol, police at the house, raiding the house regularly, and I had just a warped sense of belief about the world, about law enforcement, about society and community. That was it was us against the world, and we had to take, and that was the only way we could succeed and be successful. And I lived that life to the fullest. So as I became in my youth, my teen, I was in arrested when I was like 11, 12 years old. I'm in juvenile hall. I'm in the juvenile justice system for several years, ultimately released and continued right into the Kern County jail system. And at 1 month after my 20th birthday, I ended up murdering Michael Hoy in in Bakersfield. And I got involved in this drug ring. I was a low man on the totem pole, and I was just a hoodlum criminal selling drugs, trying to make money. And I was approached by two people to kill their partner in this drug ring for $10,000, and I would take his place, and then I would be the big guy on the block making the drugs and money. And it didn't even occur to me that this was wrong at all. And so I agreed to. I actually murdered him in October 30th, 1987. Was arrested a few days later. Uh, was charged with murder for financial gain, ultimately convicted, sentenced to state prison at 20 years old and life without parole. Um, Came into the prison system uh, at Folsom State Prison and was immediately lauded by everybody around me. As soon as I get there, my criminal activities, my murderous behavior and evil mind was patted on the back, so to speak. And so I was accepted, and it just continued to reinforce those warped beliefs and my sense of self in the world that I lived. So I continued in that lifestyle, in trouble quite a bit. Criminal activity in prison continued, got worse. Corcoran Shoe, Pelican Bay Shoe, Tehachapi Shoe, and
Hey, Nick,
yeah,
can you explain for some listeners, because sometimes we use the acronyms.
right,
People that are used to hearing these things.
true. And
Oh,
my
no,
apologies.
no,
Yeah,
it's okay. It happens all the time. So, can you tell us what kind of trouble were you getting into there? I think a lot of people don't understand how the prison system works. Is that you have to almost align with certain groups or races,
sure,
and then
sure,
what kind of trouble were you? What kind of? I mean, some people think that when you go to prison, like you can't really get in trouble. So,
right,
what kind of trouble were you getting in there? And then that brought you into, and I'm going to have you explain SHU, which is a security housing unit.
sure,
But
sure.
you can tell us what that was like, and then tell us what was it like to be in SHU.
Right. So, coming to prison, I'm white, I'm Caucasian. You're going to immediately be aligned with other ethnic groups, racial groups, whether de facto by the Department of Corrections or just by virtue of your ethnicity and what your skin color is at that time. And I believe it's still the same today. So, um, I'm immediately aligned with whites. I'm from a racial background in Bakersfield, so it was just a natural inclination for me to gravitate towards these groups, and I'm receiving um, that those accolades for my criminal behaviors, and so it was just perfect fit for me, and so I relished that, and I flourished in that lifestyle, and so uh, you come into prison, you're immediately associating with these racial groups, ethnic groups, and in the state prisons in California, those racial and ethnic groups are controlled by prison gangs ultimately. So over whites are the Aryan Brotherhood. So the Aryan Brotherhood, California prison gang, and federal as well, but they control everything with the white population in prison, um, that respective group. And so you are obligated as a white person in a men's prison, you're obligated to participate in certain activities, drug sales, drug running, making them money, making weapons, participating in riots. Uh, hits on other people. Maybe there's discipline. Maybe you're jumping on somebody at their behest. So that was a lifestyle that was normal. And then I'm also continuing drug activity inside, where I'm also trying to make money for myself. So, and I get away with probably 95% of anything I've done. So the few times, I think I had a total of 12 rules violations reports, but I could have easily had 1,000, but landed myself, got a leading a riot charge in Old Folsom, went to Corcoran Shoe, the security housing unit, prison within the prison system, where you're segregated from the general population for security purposes. And it's now the crime and the gang issue is now magnified. It's exponentially magnified to the point where everybody's involved in gang activity and everybody's involved in violence and crime. And I'm 22, I believe I was 22, 23 years old, and I land myself in Corcoran Shoe in the fall of 1991. And with that mentality, I loved it. I went right in there. So I'm working out and eating as much as I can every day, waiting for the doors to open so I can stab somebody, attack somebody, rival gangs, etc. Going to group yards, getting shot at, and ultimately, I'm in such an inordinate amount of violence at the time that I ended up getting kicked out of Corcoran Shoe, and they put me on a special transport to Pelican Bay Shoe. And so now I land in Pelican Bay Shoe in early 1992. And now it's complete opposite. It's complete 180-degree opposite. It is a complete isolation. And I went there in 1992. Isolation, really time to reflect, almost you're forced to. And now you're around heavy hitters, so to speak, the top notch at the time of all prison gang members. This is before they had many of the prison gang members in California had been charged and convicted under the RICO Act in Central Federal Prison. So they were primarily in Tehachapi, California, the prison there at CCI, Pelican Bay, and Corcoran Shoe. And so now you feel like you've graduated your prison career. You're now at the top of the food chain, and it's very violent, very deadly. One wrong move. Remember, I'm not a prison gang member, but I'm an associate, and so one wrong move, you're killed. You're killed. You make one wrong move. And then I continued that lifestyle. I ended up getting out of the Shoe in Pelican Bay, going now to the main line, opening up prisons, Lancaster, go to Pelican Bay mainline, more violence, drama, a lot of prison politics, drug activity, a lot of violence. And then I ended up being transferred to Lancaster in the summer of 1993. More drugs on a prison yard than I had ever seen in my life. And
Nick, when you say there's a lot of drugs in the yard, what kind of drugs are you talking about?
So we're talking about everything. So heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, alcohol was just being everywhere. But the smaller unit metric of a drug, the more value it has. So marijuana takes up a lot of space. There's a little bit of marijuana. There's more illicit controlled substances, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin especially. And so literally just pounds of it throughout the facility, and cash, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in cash being exchanged on the facility. And I'm greedy. I'm a drug addict. I don't use drugs at the time other than marijuana and alcohol. I had stopped using illicit drugs, but I saw the value in it. And so I get into the heroin trade. I don't use heroin. I get into the methamphetamine trade, and now I'm selling, making money hand over fist. And then what comes with that in a level 4 general population facility in California is violence, because if you're selling drugs and you have to be prepared for somebody not going to pay you, or somebody just steals your drugs, then you have to be prepared to exact some violence and retribution for that. So I'm staying prepared at all times. I have people with me, friends, other people who are making money with me, and we have weapons, and at the drop of the hat, somebody's going to get stabbed or murdered if they don't pay their $100 drug debt. And I ultimately was, my cell was searched. I got caught with a homemade weapon in the cell, back to Pelican Bay Shoe, where I had come from a year and a half earlier. And I was becoming disillusioned by the whole process. It had been about 8 years in prison at this time. And I am 26 or so years old, 26, 27, and another shoe term. I ended up appealing it. I got pretty good at administrative law, and I ended up appealing it and winning, to where the prison officials had to release me back to the general population. And I'm back to the general population in Pelican Bay, and I start thinking differently. So that's where my rehabilitation really began. But my thinking at the time, I'm becoming disillusioned with this lifestyle, with this criminal lifestyle within prison. And I began to think deeply about my own crime, the murder I committed against Michael Hoy, to where I'm 27 years old, and up to that point, it'd been about I'm almost 28. It's almost been 8 years, and I'm thinking up to that point, it had always been acceptable to me to murder somebody, and I always counted him as the loser and myself the winner in this game, in this criminal gang lifestyle in Bakersfield, to where he had crossed somebody he made mad, and they wanted him murdered, they wanted him killed, and so that was acceptable to me. And so me having committed the murder was equally acceptable. It was equally acceptable amongst my peers. Therefore, I was fine with it until I become disillusioned, and I start thinking a little deeply about this in the spring of 1995. And I come to the realization that something's wrong with me. It's not him. It's not them. Something's wrong with me and my thinking.
Nick, so how did you? What I want to know is, how did you get to that place? You were like you said, you were becoming like a shot caller in there, and you were doing all these things inside. What you said, you were disillusioned, but what got you to that place? Were you reading? I mean, what got you to this place where you said, you know what, I'm the one that has a problem?
It's a great question, and I've really attributed it to being a late bloomer in brain functionality and executive function developing. I'm a paralegal. We study the law, and we talk about and the U.S. Supreme Court. Many courts have ruled that at the age of 25, and we have youth offender laws, that the brain begins to develop to where now there's an accountability issue. I'm 27, so I look back and I go, I'm a late bloomer. At 27, I start to think differently. I felt like I was maturing in my thinking. And and I'll just add one little component to that, is being in the shoe, and especially in Pelican Bay Shoe, you're deprived of so much. At this time, you're deprived of human contact. You're deprived of education. You're deprived of relationships. You're so isolated that you begin to really seek those things that you didn't have any value on before. So me growing up, I had no value on education. I felt like I knew everything I needed to know already to survive and live life. But now, when in Pelican Bay Shoe, I have no ability to. We're reading old books and sharing books. It was so difficult. You couldn't even take a correspondence course at the time due to security issues. But I'm watching PBS documentaries on world history, and I'm just soaking this up. I just love history. I love learning. I love reading, love writing. And I'm sure that was a component in the catalyst that prompted that change for me in 1995. But I began to become disillusioned, I think, specifically with the violence aspect, the crimes in prison, and that there was no cause. It was always, this is for our people. or our race or our gang, and you and I lived that and I pushed that as well. But I come to realize that at that time that there was no loyalty, there was no value in that, there was no cause, and people were being killed despite not doing anything wrong per se in prison. And so it was easy for me to go, you know what, something's wrong with that, and I'm going to look elsewhere. I got into spirituality, I got into transcendental meditation, some new age mysticism, Buddhist practices, and all simultaneously. I start thinking differently about myself and my own crimes and criminality. And that was really the beginning, in the midst of riots and violence, and not sure if I was going to make it off this prison yard, alive, with everything that's going on. And so ultimately, I began to think differently. Started to, and I ended up having somebody preach that. I was a tattoo artist as well. I used to tattoo for a long time, making money, and I was tattooing on a guy who was a Christian, and he preached the gospel message of Jesus Christ to me, and it resonated with me. Something hit me, and specifically was we were talking about the world history and how Israel became a nation in 1948. And I knew that extra biblically, outside of the Bible, I knew that historically. And so I saw some truth here that made me dig deeper. And it just bowled me over to the point where I had to really just succumb to this truth that was changing me and transforming me. And I never looked back. And so
Yeah.
continued in, yeah,
Well, let me ask you a question really quickly, and
please.
I'm going to get Susan in a little bit too. Um, it's a fascinating story, and I love your honesty. And how did people take it on the yard? Did you start telling people, I don't want anything to do with this anymore? How did you get through the strength of telling people, I want nothing to do with this anymore? Because as Susan articulated at the beginning, there's a lot of people. It's difficult for people that don't. I'll just say this: in life, generally, you have people that try to get over on people. In prison, it's a way of life. You're always trying to manipulate. You're always
Right.
trying to get advantage, and part of it is because you have so little, and part of it is so it's always about trying to get a little extra because I'm inside. I can't go anywhere. This is what I do.
Right.
So manipulation is part of the lifestyle there.
Sure.
So the question I have for you is, how did you get out of it, and how did the inmates take it when you said, I don't want anything to do with this anymore?
Great question, and I'm sorry I skipped that. I've talked about it quite a bit with people over the years, and I knew as a white man in prison under these rules and obligations with the Aryan Brotherhood and the Associates that, and I wasn't involved in shot calling at that time. I had just transferred to New York, but I knew I was obligated to tell the shot callers of the facility that I'm no longer with that mindset, and so I struggled with that. That was a very strange time for me, mentally, emotionally. I'm very vulnerable. I felt like that I was weak now. That people would view me as weak. That I would likely become victimized as a result, and I was very concerned about that. But there was just something that had pushed me over the edge, that was the only path forward for me. I didn't see any other path, and so I just kind of cautiously moved forward. I approached the shot callers at the time in late 1995 in Pelican Bay General Population B facility, and I let them know. And I said, I'm a Christian now. I'm not going to be over here with you guys. I'm not going to be this, that, and they just laughed, and they said, we know you're still with us. We know you're still, you're still one of us. We know you're crazy, and we know you're gonna. And I'm like, I'm really not. I'm really not. And they said, it's okay. And fortunately for me, uh, I was actually able to transfer out a couple months later to a really mellow facility that had opened in Corcoran, a general population, and um, I was able to continue on my reputation for 8 years, where people didn't challenge me. They thought, even though I viewed myself as very program oriented, on the road to rehabilitation changed. My mentality had changed, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to fight anybody. I didn't want to stab anybody. I didn't want to be involved in anything, and had no intention of doing so. But people still had that view of me. So I was able to continue staying on the main line for a number of years without ever participating in any of those activities, and still being fine on the general population. So I was very fortunate.
And then when did you start taking a lot of programs inside? Did they switch you to a different prison?
Right. So I didn't really begin to take too many programs except for self. So as a Christian, really involved in programs in the chapel, different chapel programs. And for me, I had returned back to Corcoran general population that had just turned level 4 facilities, high security facilities, to, excuse me, level 3 facilities to level 4s. So I get back there and I see all these staff members, officers, lieutenants, captains, AWs, sergeants, who used to be here in the SHU when I was running around acting the fool. And they looked at me like, oh, that crazy guy over there, that kid. And a year goes by, a couple of years goes by, and they see a change in me. And now I developed some pretty close relationships with staff because they saw the change in me. And I'll just jump ahead just a brief minute. Many of these staff members, it was about 100 of them, ultimately signed a declaration that their belief I was rehabilitated to Governor Brown, and recommended I have my sentence commuted, and I ultimately was commuted in 2018, my sentence.
Well,
So
let me ask you this: did you know, Susan? When did you meet Nick? Did you meet him prior to being commuted?
No, actually, the way I met Nick was I believe his wife reached out to me. It was after he was commuted and was going to the parole board, and I believe she reached out to me to say, "Do you have like an internship available? Do you have a job available?" And this was not that long after I had been betrayed, so I said, "Well, I don't have a job available. I don't have a unpaid internship or anything, but then I think Nick, I think you sent me some of your writings, and it was
right.
like, I was like beyond impressed. I mean, they were just brilliant. And so I said, well, I don't have a job, but I would be happy to write you a letter of support to the parole board. So I did that. And then, Nick got paroled. And then not long after, he called me and said, "Hey, I would love to come and meet you and thank you." So he drove 2 hours from, I think it was South Central LA, right?
Right.
Up to my office in Lancaster. And we spent a couple hours together talking. And that was more time than the person I called brother had ever spent with me after he got out of prison. And so it took time. Our friendship took time to develop, but then we started working together, and Nick launched his own company, but he's also the paralegal for the Center for Life Without Parole Studies, and we've become really close friends, and a lot of healing through our friendship. That not everybody is like the person who betrayed me. That there are people who are truly rehabilitated, and Nick is like just a profoundly important example of somebody who was truly rehabilitated.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, it's funny because, and I think Nick would concur with this. I've spoken to a few thousand long-term offenders that have been in prison for long portions of their life, and they will be the first to tell you, be careful. They will tell you, be careful. Don't trust everybody. You got to be careful because not everybody is at the same place as Nick was. Not everybody is, and when they get out, a lot of people will revert right back to the way they were prior to them. Because, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit about this. The psychology of all this is sometimes people go in they go in as a teenager. They'll go in like 18, 19 years old. And I can't even tell you how many times people have said to me, Figueroa, I went in at 18 or 9 years old. I'm 56 now, but mentally I'm still like 18 or 19 years old.
True.
Because they need help navigating all the things that have changed in our life. So that's the one thing about prison that's scary to me sometimes, is you don't get that. You skip a lot of life stages.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's hard to it's hard to get that back. And I used to tell people, you can't get it back all at one time. So don't pressure yourself to get it back. But people that can't cope with it end up going right back to the lifestyle that
Right.
put them back in prison.
Right.
I've actually had people tell me, I can't make it out here. I'm going to commit a new offense so I could go back to prison again. And that breaks my heart, when I hear that, and I remember someone told me that one time, and I said, well, you're not going to go back. So, but with that being said, Susan, it's a very common thing. I think all of us, just generally speaking, you have to be careful about who you trust and not trust.
Sure.
And let me ask you this question, Nick, how difficult was it for you to get that commuted, given that you had a life term? What steps did you take? Did you do all the legal parts yourself?
Yeah. So I had life without parole plus 1 year. And so I had initially, I'll just briefly tell you, I had an officer in Corcoran General Population. His name was C.J. Terrell, and he was a black officer, and he was a Christian man, and he and I were real close. And so he said, Nick, you need to do a clemency application. And I'm like, I don't know. Right. So a couple months goes by. Hey, did you ever do that application? And I'm like, no, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So another couple months, he says, you need to do that clemency. So I wrote up so the clemency application to the governor, he had to answer a couple of questions of why you think you should be commuted, have your sentence commuted. So I grappled with that for a little bit, but it really, in the final analysis, because of my belief that I was rehabilitated. So I drafted that, a couple pages. I brought it back to him. I let him see it, and he said, let's pray on it. So he grabs my hands, this black officer, and I'm a white inmate, and he grabs my hands, and we're praying on the yard, in the general population yard. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be paying for this later, right? So we kept on. I was actually a captain's clerk at the facility, and I had some really good relationships. So I walked into, he said, you need to have staff sign this that know you. So I'm like, okay. So I made a little declaration sheet with some lines, and I went in the office and I started to type it out. And my supervisor was a Sergeant Bruce Cook, and he comes walking in and he says, what are you typing there? And I explained everything. He goes, no, I'm going to be the first one to sign. And he was a senior sergeant at the institution, and I was just humbled. I was humbled. And I just saw him recently. We have lunch regularly. We go out, and we've had barbecues together and everything, as a couple of retired Department of Corrections employees. And so that began the ball rolling with people wanting to sign this declaration who had known me for a number of years, and many previously when I was in the SHU. So 2004, I initially submitted with Governor Schwarzenegger, waited. Nothing had happened, and ended up getting some legal assistance later on, about 10, 12 years later, and refined a little bit, statements of insight, just a full comprehensive clemency application, and was interviewed in August of 2018. So some 14 years after I'd initially submitted. And now there was really a push with the Brown administration to where they were actively looking at clemency applications specifically for life without parole prisoners. And I was very fortunate to receive the commutation of my sentence for Christmas of 2018. Yeah.
Did you find out why you got the commutation? What did they say? Or you just got it?
No, I got it. The governor's office called. By then, they're giving out commutations quite a bit, so you don't get calls from the governor specifically. But I got a call from one of his staff attorneys, and she said, "You know what? She goes, I'm the one that did the workup on your case with the governor," and she goes, "They were moved by my upbringing and how I was raised and how I was influenced, and they wanted to see me have a second chance." And so
I guess there's two things to get to that. One is that not all regardless of what people feel, sometimes not all correctional officers are bad. There's a lot of
Absolutely.
there's a lot of people in there that have a good heart that want you to
Of
get out,
course.
and they saw your development. But the other part of it is, and Susan, maybe you can talk about this a little bit, is that many people, because of their upbringing, it's caused them to go off track, where some of us that have a better upbringing don't have that issue. And so when you talk about that, Susan, can you talk a little bit about how, when someone's raised in a situation like this, why it's important for the governor's office or to have some understanding about the person's background? Why is that so important?
Well, I think that's really very important because, when people are traumatized, they can go one of two ways. They can become self-destructive, or they can be antisocial, or both. Actually, usually it's both at the same time. But and then it's also known that when you between 18 and 25 is like the most dangerous years, because you're fully responsible for whatever you do, and you're really not dealing with a full deck. And especially if you're traumatized, you're not dealing with a full deck. And then after, Nick mentioned, like 25, 26, or even a few years beyond that, the brain develops and you think differently. And then you can, over years, you can transform, considerably. But I want to say also, one thing that I learned after my experience of betrayal, it propelled me to learn a lot about psychopathy. And I took a course. Dr. Robert Hare is one of the leading researchers in psychopathy over the past 40 years. He's the one who developed the PCLR, the psychopathy checklist revised, and so I took a course with him and one of his colleagues on psychopathy. I've done extensive reading on psychopathy, and one of the probably the key issue with psychopathy is lack of conscience. So you can have someone who came from
Susan, you're a doctor, so you're going to have to explain and give us the definition, because I'm sure there's some people saying, I got to go to my dictionary and look that up.
Oh, psychopathy. Well,
Yeah.
psychopathy is it's not even in the there's a compendium or a book of mental disorders called the DSM-5. It's not even in there. It's related to antisocial personality disorder. So it's not a diagnosis, but it's like a constellation. Sorry to keep using these like big words, but it's like a constellation of traits that taken together result in people, having lack of conscience. There's a whole bunch of traits. They're superficial charm. They're glib talkers. They are irresponsible. But the core of it is they have no conscience. They can do horrible things to people and feel nothing about it. And that's different. That's different than someone coming from a background of trauma, not dealing with a full deck when they're a teenager or a young adult, committing a terrible crime and then growing. People who are psychopaths, and it's a biologically based condition. It's not related to trauma. It can be worsened by trauma, but it's basically a genetic kind of condition. They've done a lot of research on the genetics of psychopathy. There's MRI, functional MRI changes that you see in people who have psychopathy, and they're very dangerous, and they're not just in prison. Dr. Hare and his colleague, Dr. Babiak, they wrote a book called Snakes in Suits, and it's all about corporate psychopaths. Like the CEOs, like they believe that the whole Enron scandal was due to like a large buildup of psychopaths at the top of the financial industry that resulted in so much damage. But the thing is, they're very good at manipulation. They're masters at manipulation. Even Dr. Hare, with all his experience, would say, I've been fooled too. And that makes me feel a little better, because sometimes I feel a lot, like, why didn't I see that? Why didn't I? But they're very good at it. And there was a study, I think in 2009, in Canada, that showed that sex offenders who were tested as psychopaths, they got out of prison 2.5 times earlier than their non-psychopathic, you know, fellow prisoners, but just because of their ability to manipulate and deceive. And I will tell you, you know, when I reviewed the um, transcript from my ex brother's parole hearing, you could see that. You could see it so clearly, and I learned things from that. The extent of the deception, how someone could live with that. You know, he was which he never shared with me. He was a sex offender. He was in YA for crimes against women, and the DA said, you know, that he should be reviewed for a sexually violent predator commitment. You know, and I didn't know any of this. You know, and despite that, he was found suitable for parole because he had a lot of support from famous people, and and actually, you know, manipulated the commissioners. So it's difficult. It's a
No, Susan, everything you're saying is so dead on right, and I'm glad you brought it up. It's not just that's what I was saying. It's not just people in institutions; it's people on the outside as well. And there's been many people that I think we said it earlier that, you know what, I've had people come up and say, hey, this person shouldn't be out because there's no they're pretty disconnected from their feelings. There's not a lot of affect there. So
Mhm.
very careful. And those people that I was warned were that way, I, I can't think of one that didn't go back and reoffend. And it's like you said, there is, and a lot of, like you said, is like it's genetic, and it's, you know, like you said, they have issues going on from birth, and you know, and nobody catches it. Like you said, nobody catches it. Nobody has the insight to catch it. And I guess let me ask you this, Nick, how did you develop insight? I know that's like for some people it's a very controversial word, but I know that you have a consulting business now. You prepare people to go to the board, and I know Susan helps you with that as well. Susan's so involved with the reentry process for people getting out of prison. The question I have for you is, how do you develop, and I guess, Nick, how do you develop the insight? What advice do you give people? What is insight? And then Susan, maybe you can give a little, give your ideas and thoughts about it as well.
Right. So we just use a dictionary, a collegiate dictionary definition, which is just understanding the inner workings, the understanding of any one thing. And in this particular case, we're talking about criminality. So in the context of criminal rehabilitation, this is really nationwide, but specifically here in California, we're talking about understanding an insight into causative factors. And causative factors are a nebulous term. Many people, it's mysterious to many people, but what we're talking about is character defects possessed by an individual. And all of us in society possess character defects, but when they culminate in the commission of a crime or a criminal act, they become causative factors of that crime. So for me personally, I set off in 1995, in late 1995, in trying to understand about myself and how I became a criminal. And I've shared with people quite often about when I had this defining moment when I first came to prison, and I'd been incarcerated many times as a youth, as a young adult in county jail, but nothing, you know, for any lengthy period of time. But the first thing I realized about going to prison and when I landed in Folsom Prison is that physical separation from my family, I felt liberated in some way. It made me feel liberated from that thinking, that mentality, that philosophy, and that criminal thinking. But I continued in that path. But I went back in 1995. I went back to that thinking and tried to analyze that a little more and just try to understand, how did I become a criminal? How did Nick Woodall develop that thinking? How did I um, find it acceptable to burglarize, to steal somebody's car, to rob a liquor store, or to ultimately commit a murder? And so it's a breakdown and analyzation of all of those factors that go in and culminate into those crimes you commit. So what I teach at POSSE Solutions, my consulting company, is understanding the causative factors of criminality, not just the crime that lands you in prison. Um, and I think I'll speak for myself, when I began to develop a deep understanding of how that occurred, now uh, I'm 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 really equipped with the ability to avert those circumstances again, should they arise. And it's nothing. Why? Because I'm a law abiding citizen now. That's my mentality. So I don't think about how I can go commit a crime. Now, what I used to teach inside for many years, a couple of decades, is that I used to share with people in lifer groups, and we had, 100 guys in there, and I would say, everybody here who's striving to be found suitable for the parole board, whether they're rehabilitated or not, you're all trying to get back into the beehive, so to speak, and the beehive of society. But you've been exiled from the beehive because you are a rogue bee and you didn't follow the rules. So let me give you a little bit of conduct lesson on how the bees work in the beehive, so to speak. When you see a crime committed at your neighbor's house, you don't just shut the blinds and say, well, I hope nothing happens over there. You call 911. That's what people in society do. If you see a crime, if you see somebody being harmed, you help them. But the mentality we have in, crime ridden neighborhoods and communities is, you don't talk to the police, you don't call the cops, you don't help somebody, you justify, rationalize, and that's just not the aspects of a healthy society. So I used to share that with people, and I believed it wholeheartedly. And I've had to test the theory myself since I've been out of prison. I've called law enforcement more times than I can count, and I see a drunk driver, I'm the first one going to video him and call the CHP and get that guy off the road. I sat in prison with so many people who had drunk driving killing families. It just hits me so hard. The same with, I just had to call the 911 over here near my offices just a week and a half ago because somebody was getting beat up outside a bar, and I'm like, this is terrible. They came over, they stopped it and everything, but that's the mentality. That's what changes. Whereas before, I would maybe block somebody from seeing it so it can continue. Or if somebody's robbing a liquor store, you make sure nobody's looking. You facilitate it because that's your mentality. And that changed for me. And when that changed for me as a result of really developing that insight into my own criminality, now I transformed into a citizen again. Or I shouldn't even say again, because I never was, but transformed into a citizen in a healthy society. And that
And
was,
Nick, can I ask you a question? I've seen this myself, but I want to get your perspective. And Susan, have you ever had a client or someone you worked with or knew somebody that you're like, this person is not going to be able to get out because they have zero insight? I mean,
absolutely, many times, many
and
times.
so what are you and Susan do in those situations? Are you honest with them? I mean, I'm very honest with someone when I'll just tell them straight up, you need to stop telling
Right,
me that it was somebody else, and let you need to just,
right.
you need to take. In fact, that was a few weeks ago. I was in that situation. I just told somebody, hey, you know what? I get you, but you have to take accountability for that. So, what do
Absolutely.
you do in those situations?
So I'll just say that Susan and I work together within the Center for LWOP Studies and independently as well. So I work at my own company, and we provide consultation services, whereas at the Center for LWOP Studies, we're more selective. So we do an extensive vetting process before, remember, it's a nonprofit, before Susan, as the director, makes that determination that we're going to put a immense amount of funding and effort behind this cause to help somebody, whereas somebody is hiring me and my company to provide that consultation service. So I get a lot more people who aren't there than the Center for LWOP Studies does. But absolutely. And, I many people don't want to listen to that. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to change. Maybe they're older. I've have it, runs the gamut. But they ultimately, and I explained to them, you will be denied parole. You will be denied. I can assure you that commissioners in a parole board hearing are going to poke and prod you until they can find out the metal there. They're going to test all that. And it's up to them whether they accept that or not. So, but I do lay it on the table for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and with the center, like Nick said, we do an extensive vetting process. We do a confidential legal video call with them to kind of, talk to them about their crime and about their who they try to get a sense of who they are. And if I decide not to represent someone, I don't know if I'm as honest as Nick is, because I'm just not going to represent them, and it doesn't serve any purpose for me to go into, like, why. But I've had people get really pissed off at me and say, you don't really care about people with LWAP. It's like, no, I have. I don't want to say it's like limited resources, but I want to devote my time to people who I know either they're ready right now, or with a lot of work and assistance, they can get there. And bottom line, they have a conscience.
Well, I've so thoroughly enjoyed this interview. It's just both of you have amazing stories. I love the reality that you bring to it, because I think a lot of people think that, um, and I think it's pretty, like what you were saying, Susan. I think it was unfair of those people that felt like you shouldn't be part of the group because you didn't want to just follow. Not everything is roses. It's just not. That's not the reality of the world.
Right.
It's just not the reality of the world. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
you,
I want to say something about that before we end, because that actually has been one of the most painful consequences of this. Um, and also, it is very disturbing to me that there's all this forensic psychological research out there for the past 40 years on psychopathy. It's like really well researched, and these groups that want to, end extreme sentencing, end mass incarceration, 20-year maximum sentence, and the burden is on the state to prove that they should be retained. Um, it's never mentioned. The word psychopathy is never mentioned. And in fact, I tried to watch that 26.2 to Life. I tried to watch it, and the beginning of it was Brian Stevenson talking about those things that I used to say. All human beings are capable of redemption. We are all worth more than the worst thing we've ever done. And I couldn't watch it because it's so one-sided. I mean, yes, there are many people capable of redemption who have done extraordinary things. Um, but they're not everyone. And I think that really has to be acknowledged. And in order to keep society safe, we have to be able to identify who those people are.
yeah, and I think, Susan, I think, like you said, we all, like, I think all of us want to be pie in the sky. Like we all want
A
to say
lot.
yes. Everybody can be. Everybody, but that's just not the reality of the
Mhm.
world. And that's not saying that. I would say the vast majority of people can be that way and have that
Mhm.
potential. But like you said, there's a small portion of our society that, for whatever reasons, they have to be given a timeout, and sometimes the timeout's longer.
That's right.
Has to be longer for them,
That's
because,
right.
like you said, I mean, there's some people out there that will, that will physically hurt you, and they're not connected with what pain they're causing
That's right.
personally with that person, and I know, Nick, we didn't bring this up too, and I know, Susan, because when you're in this work, sometimes you don't think about it. We think about those victims a lot, and the effect that you have, not only on the person that's life was taken, but all those people that it affected around them.
Absolutely.
And
Mhm.
I think, Nick, that's right. I guess that's a good segue. Can you, if anybody wants your services, please, what's the best way to get in contact with you? And also, really quickly, if you could mention your foundation. I know you have a foundation. Um,
Right. So the best way to contact us is on our website. We have contact forms on that on there at www.possesolutions.com, POSSE solutions.com. And there's wealth of information, videos, everything there. I also have, and there's materials there as well. I have some things on Amazon, written books on this, workbooks, help people understanding insight into causative factors, impact and magnitude, remorse, the four elements of what we identify as insight in criminal rehabilitation. And then the foundation that I founded is named after the man I murdered, the Michael Edward Hoy Foundation. And what we do here is we seek to break that cycle of criminality. Began with myself, and by doing so, we believe we break the cycle of victimization as well. So the criminal rehabilitation materials that I've produced and developed through POSSE Solutions, we want to make those available free of charge to people who can't afford them. And so the Hoy Foundation sponsors that and provides those services for free.
Man, Nick, thank you so much for being on. You amazing work, and what a
Thank you.
great story. You're just such a yeah. I mean, it's just the amount of insight and the change, and man, I
Thank you.
just love your story. Just love it, and just keep living that life, man. You're doing amazing things, my friend.
Thank you. And Susan, you know, we're such a collaborative effort, the things that we do. So I've been blessed, learned so much from her, and we've just worked great together. And we think we can take on the world and make some change. Sometimes we can't, but we try.
No, and that's okay.
And thanks for having us.
Oh, absolutely. I love having you on. And Susan, I know you have a book. You have to give us the name of your book, but how do they get a hold of you as well?
They can contact me through, well, I'll give the center email. It's Susan at LWOP studies.org. And the book is actually, I published it in 2007. And it has more to do with the impact of childhood trauma on individual, society, and the world. So it reflects my earlier thinking before my eyes were opened after that devastating experience. My earlier thinking was that if we heal childhood trauma, we can heal the world. And unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Yeah, I don't think anything is that simple, right? And I think that's what you said. Like you said before, we like it to be that simple, but life in general is not that simple. Everything's more nuanced than that.
That's right.
That's what I really appreciate about this conversation is that what you're saying, Susan, is, fortunately, because of the work that I do, probably Nick and I have been exposed to that for a long time. But it doesn't make the disappointment any more less painful. And that's the whole thing about it. I think that there's been many people that I expected more of in terms of in the population that I work with, and then it didn't turn out that way. I want it to be that way. And then you always kind of second guess yourself and say, hey, you know what? But at the end of the day, if you're doing the right thing, Susan, and you know what, you fulfilled that need and you helped somebody and you made an impact on the world, that's what that person has to grapple with, not you. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I always want you to continue doing amazing work like you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, and we just have to stay positive. Even if there's some people that try to drag us down, we just keep moving forward. But
one person at a time.
Yes,
That's right. We are so delighted because we were successful in helping a really you know who it is. I've talked to you about him.
Yeah.
Really deserving, good, decent man. He's going to have an opportunity to have a second chance to contribute positively to the world. And Nick and I work together to really help him get to the point where it's a reality. He's going to be getting out in December, and I'm so excited. And right now we're working with a few other people who I think it's going to be going the same way, and I'm just so happy.
Oh, so I want to end with these last two questions here. Just briefly, what do you guys do for fun?
That's a really good question.
I ride my Honda Goldwing motorcycle as much as I can to the mountains and the beach.
What about you, Susan? What do you do?
Oh my God. I can't really say I do anything for fun, because like I shared in the beginning, I'm 68 years old. I had, after that horrible surgery and the complications, I have health issues. So I'm focused on what is my legacy going to be. So, but this is kind of fun though.
I was just going to say that. You took the word out. I was going to
yeah.
a podcast.
Yeah, podcast, we
See,
definitely want to do the podcast, but then I started, I'm actually going to do this project in 2024. I want to create a documentary film about the stuff that we talked about here, about the nuances of criminal rehabilitation, and the fact that, and about psychopathy and the impact of psychopathy on the world, and things like, it never occurred to me when I was in this bubble of thinking about, everyone's capable of redemption. What about people like Hitler who have created such destruction? And then what if there is some spark of good in somebody like Hitler, or even Hitler? What if there is, what if that's true? What does that mean? Does it change anything? I want to explore these kind of questions. So I'm studying on my own. I thought about going back to school and doing that,
Well, you know
but
what?
it's like, no,
I'm not,
no.
you have to save degrees for other people too. So
Exactly.
you already
thank
have
you.
you have the doctorate, you got your MD, and you got your you have your JD. I'm not going there with you.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
thank you so much for both being here. Until next time, until
Thank
our
you.
next amazing guest. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Until next time, keep learning.